Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Join the official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to stay updated and get all the materials on the Telegram. The link to the channel can be found in the description box. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Now today let us take up the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 22nd of August 2021. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion from our UPSC prelims and mains point of view. Now the second Pre-Pareekshan 2021 conducted by Rao's IAS is live. So if you have not attempted this All India free mock test, then do it at the earliest, as the date for second Pre-Pareekshan has been extended for a day. Now attempting a free mock test will help you in identifying your strong and weak areas, and also it will give you an idea as to where you stand in the competition. So what are you waiting for? Register yourself on elearn.raoias.com and attempt the Pre-Pareekshan mock test for GS1. Now the first news to be discussed appears in the FAQ section on page number 11. The news highlights power play. Why are chief ministers protesting against the draft electricity amendment bill, which proposes more private players in electricity distribution? So the union government has introduced the Electricity Amendment Bill 2021, which seeks to de-license power distribution and also provide for other amendments in the Electricity Act. So one of the main purpose to introduce amendment into Electricity Act of 2003 is to provide for more private players in electricity distribution. However, the members from the opposition and chief minister of some states, such as state of West Bengal and Punjab, have raised objections to certain amendments proposed in the draft amendment bill of 2021. So in this regard, in this analysis, let us understand about reasons to amend Electricity Act of 2003, proposals under the new bill of 2021, and also certain intended benefits with respect to the proposals under the new bill, and also the concerns raised by states and opposition members. Now, as stated earlier, that one of the main reasons to introduce the new amendment bill to Electricity Act of 2003 is the mounting losses for state DISCOMs or state distribution companies. So, distribution of electricity across the country by these distribution companies, which are mostly state owned, has remained one of the key areas of concern due to their mounting losses. And as per a data, at the end of June 2021, the DISCOMs owed over Rs 90,000 crores to power producers. Further, 36 out of 56 DISCOMs have reported aggregate losses of around 32,900 crore as on March 31, 2020. So these are some of the data which suggest increasing or mounting losses for state electricity distribution companies. Now we all know that subsidy is provided in the power sector. However, the provision of these subsidies to the power sector has certain adverse impacts. Now, one of the most important adverse impact can be said to be adoption of political populism in power sector. For example, providing free electricity to farmers in some states, or even providing subsidized electricity rates to households by certain states. So what happens is that since the state is providing free electricity to farmers or even subsidized electricity rate to households, then that part of the subsidy is to be borne by the state. Now what state does is to go for cross-subsidizing the industry sector, that is charging higher electricity rates from the industries. Now this cross-subsidization overall results in higher tariffs for industries, and this can be said to be one of the adverse impact of following political populism by certain state governments. So because of this cross subsidy, it impacts or affects the manufacturing sector, and because of this the cost of manufacturing increases as they have to pay higher electricity bills. Now there are also situations at times when certain industries are unable to pay these higher electricity bills, and overall this results in lower profits for state DISCOMs. Now since state DISCOMs are mostly under debt or they have taken loan from the banks, hence they are not able to pay their loan on time, And because of lack of financial resources, these state DISCOMs are unable to maintain their infrastructural requirements with respect to power distribution. So this overall lead to increasing aggregate technical and commercial losses for these state DISCOMs, and because of this they are unable to maintain the infrastructural needs for power distribution. Further, lowering profits of these state DISCOMs further impacts their repayment of debts. And this overall results in higher or increased non-performing assets because these state DISCOMs are unable to pay to the power generating companies in time. So overall, this can be said to be the scenario with respect to the functioning of DISCOMs and also their mounting losses. Now another point mentioned with respect to reason to introduce the new electricity amendment bill is limitation of UDAY scheme. Now we all know that the UDAY scheme was introduced by the Union government in the year 2015, and the scheme was introduced to restructure the financial turnaround of the state DISCOMs, and a similar question was also asked by UPSC in the prelims examination. So the purpose to introduce the UDAY scheme was financial turnaround of state DISCOMs, operational improvement of the state DISCOMs, reducing the cost of generation of power, development of renewable energy, and also provision for energy efficiency and conservation. However, the UDAY scheme has brought only certain short-term financial gains for the state DISCOMs, whereas in the longer term, the state DISCOMs still reels under huge incurring debts or huge mounting losses. And this mounting losses results in lack of infrastructural investment by the state DISCOMs. And because of this, the state distribution companies are unable to upgrade the infrastructure, and this also at times results in electricity theft. So overall, the profit of the state DISCOMs continue to decline. They are unable to upgrade their infrastructure, such as installation of meter or even installation of smart meter. So what happens is that it leads to electricity theft also because of cross subsidization. And overall, we can say that the state DISCOMs are trapped in the vicious cycle of debt repayment, as due to mounting losses, they are unable to pay their debt to the power generation companies. The new bill also proposes for a universal service obligation fund in order to meet deficits with respect to cross subsidy, which we have just seen. Further, the bill also provides for fixing purchase obligations requirement to be transferred to the center. Now these purchase obligations are with respect to renewable energy, and the State Electricity Commission fixes these targets. So this fixing of purchase obligations with respect to renewable energy will now be transferred to the central government. So overall, these can be said to be the summary for reasons to amend the Electricity Act of 2003, and the whole idea is to introduce private players so as to increase competition. So proposals under the new bill includes allowing greater private player participation in power distribution. Now this will increase competition in the market. Further, this will also lead to increase in investment in the power distribution sector, and overall it will lead to improvement in service delivery, efficiency, and also electricity distribution. Further, it will also provide more choice to consumers, thereby providing flexibility in the entire mechanism of electricity distribution. And because of increased competition, increased investment, proper service delivery, improved efficiency of electricity distribution, and flexibility in terms of choice to consumers, this will also lead to price stabilization with respect to electricity rates. So these can be said to be some of the benefits with respect to introducing more private players in state distribution, and it will also relieve the state DISCOMs, as in most of the states in India apart from cities such as Delhi, Mumbai or Ahmedabad, the distribution of electricity is taken care by state DISCOMs. Now apart from introduction of private players, there are also other proposals in the bill. It includes constitution of Electricity Contract Enforcement Authority, constitution of a selection committee to select members for appellate tribunal, and also Central and State Electricity Regulatory Commission. The bill also provides for direct benefit transfer of subsidies. Further, the bill also aims to provide for reduction of cross subsidies, as we have just seen because state at times, in order to provide for certain populist measures, go for these cross-subsidization. And because of cross-subsidization, it leads to higher tariff for industries. Now, another proposal in the new bill includes distribution of sub-licensee role with the regulator's nod or regulator's approval, and also adoption of national renewable energy policy. And another proposal is regarding higher penalty for failure to meet renewable energy purchase obligation. Now, renewable energy purchase obligation is an obligation mandated by respective state electricity regulatory commission to purchase minimum level of renewable energy. So these can be said to be the overall proposals with respect to the new Electricity Amendment Bill of 2021. Now, after going through the proposals under the new Electricity Amendment Bill, let us go through some of the concerns highlighted by some of the state chief ministers. Now, some of the state governments have highlighted that introduction of private players in the electricity distribution sector will lead to cherry picking by the private players, as the private players will look for profit maximization. Now, what this means is that the private players will try to find out certain areas where they can get maximum profit. So the concerned states have raised this objection that the private players will mostly go for urban areas or for industrial sectors, as it will help them to maximize their profit. And this will leave the aspect of social sector and rural areas, including poor areas, for the state DISCOMs. So because of this, the state DISCOMs will be left in order to provide or cater to the social sector obligations, and providing electricity to the rural and poor areas in the state will be left only for the state DISCOM. Now, the state governments fear that this will further reduce the profit of state DISCOM. Not only this, it will also reduce the financial space or financial window for some of the state governments to take populist measures, for example, announcing free electricity to farmers or other sections of the society. So the state governments have raised their concerns that introducing private players in electricity distribution will further increase the losses for state DISCOMs, as the private players will try to profit maximize by selecting certain urban areas or even industries. Another concern raised by the state government is that provision of choice to consumers with respect to different private players will lead to profiteering by private players, and this will overall result in tariff hikes by these private players. So overall, the state governments fear that introduction of private players will ultimately lead to increase in electricity tariff. Now, apart from this, there are other two concerns which have been raised by some states. Now, this includes concerns with respect to higher penalty for failure to meet purchase obligations for renewable energy. Now, we have already seen that repurchase obligation refers to purchasing certain minimum level or minimum threshold of renewable energy. And in this regard, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu has stated that purchase obligations cannot be segregated for hydropower, since hydropower is monsoon dependent. So he has urged that purchase obligation should not be segregated for hydropower. So overall, these can be said to be some of the concerns raised by some states and also opposition members. So as a conclusion, we can say that central government, state government, and also private sector players, including other stakeholders, needs to come together on a common platform to address their areas of concern. And accordingly, the Union Power Minister has assured states that minimum area to be covered by private sector competitors would be defined in a manner to include an urban-rural mix. So this becomes an interesting factor that the central government is thinking for an urban-rural mix for private players. Further, the minister also ensured about a universal service obligation and elements of cross-subsidy in ceiling tariff. So overall, these concerns raised by some of the state governments needs to be chalked out with the central government. So in this analysis, you need to know about reasons to amend Electricity Act of 2003, the new proposals under the Electricity Amendment Bill of 2021, and also some of the concerns raised by certain states and opposition members. Now, this topic of Electricity Amendment Bill 2021 becomes important both from our prelims and mains perspective. Now, in the prelims, questions can be asked on the financial condition of DISCOMs, whereas in the mains, question can be asked under GS paper 3 and also GS paper 2. So after understanding of this topic, let's take up our next article for discussion. The next news to be taken up also appears in the FAQ section on page number 11. So this news says that are oil bonds to blame for high fuel prices? What is the spend on UPA era special securities and how much does the government earn from excise duties and other levies? So going through the headline, we understand the impact of oil bonds as has been discussed in this article with respect to present increased or high fuel prices. So we understand that high inflation in the economy is currently being attributed to higher petrol and diesel prices, and in this regard that economists have asked the government to reduce the fuel price, that is prices of diesel and petrol. However, the government has said that they need extra tax revenue on petroleum products to pay for oil bonds. Now these oil bonds were issued by the earlier UPA government in order to control the fiscal deficit. So let us understand that how this mechanism of oil bonds, which was issued in the previous UPA government, is impacting the fuel prices in present date. Now when the UPA government was in power, it followed the administered price mechanism on petrol and diesel prices. So under this mechanism, the price of petrol and diesel were not linked to the market. Rather, the government provided subsidy on the prices of petrol and diesel. And it was because of this, the prices of petrol and diesel was comparatively less as compared to today. So what used to happen was that the oil marketing companies used to buy petrol and diesel from international market at international prices. However, the petrol and diesel in India were sold well below the purchasing price. So suppose if the oil marketing companies were purchasing oil at rupees 100 in the international market, then this oil was sold in the domestic market, say at rupees 65, and the remaining gap of rupees 35 was provided by the central government in form of subsidy. Now this selling of oil well below the market price resulted in losses for these oil market companies, and these losses were referred as under recoveries. Now these under recoveries were compensated by the central government, and this was done by directly transferring the amount of subsidy directly to these oil marketing companies. So here in this example, rupees 35 was directly transferred into the account of these oil marketing companies by the central government. However, this increased the fiscal deficit of the government during those times. So transfer of subsidy on an annual basis increased government's fiscal deficit. So in order to keep the fiscal deficit of the government under control, the UPA government then issued oil bonds which were in the form of government securities worth rupees 1.4 lakh crores. So oil bonds was issued in the UPA era in order to control the fiscal deficit. So the government, instead of paying the huge subsidy amount directly to the oil marketing companies, rather came up with this novel idea of issuing these government security oil bonds. So in lieu of these oil bonds, the government then started transferring the interest rates to these oil marketing companies, and these oil rates were slightly higher than other government securities, as it ranged from a rate of 6.5% to 8.3%. So overall it was a win-win situation for the government as well as for the oil marketing companies. Now you must know certain things about these oil bonds. Now these oil bonds are long-term government securities having a maturity period of 15 to 20 years. So the oil bonds which were issued in the UPA era is about to mature in the present time. So the government is also worried with respect to payment of principal amount along with the interest with respect to these oil bonds. Now another important aspect is that these oil bonds are not considered as part of fiscal deficit, but rather as a part of overall public debt of the government. Now another important point is that while calculating the statutory liquidity ratio by a bank, generally it comprises of cash, gold and government securities. However, if a bank has purchased oil bonds, then such purchase of oil bond will not be included in the overall calculation of statutory liquidity ratio. So these are some of the important highlights with respect to oil bonds. So, understanding about the oil bonds brings us to the present status. Now we know that in 2010 the petrol prices was deregulated by the UPA government, and then in 2014 diesel prices was deregulated by the NDA government. And since 2010, once the petrol prices was deregulated, issuing of oil bonds have been put to an end. That is, oil bonds have not been issued by the government. However, the 15 to 20 years of maturity period which we just mentioned is about to be over. And this brings us to the concern of debt obligations of the government, not only with respect to the principal amount, but also with respect to the interest payment. So as per the data, as of 31st March 2021, rupees 1.3 lakh crores still remains to be paid with respect to the principal amount of these oil bonds to the oil marketing companies, and rupees 37,000 crores is yet to be paid to the oil marketing companies in the form of interest payment. And this is because the government is not ready to reduce the taxes on petrol and diesel, as the government believes that raising higher taxes will help the government in fulfilling its debt obligations with respect to principal amount and also interest payment for the oil bonds. Now, despite these understandings of fulfillment of debt obligations with respect to principal amount and interest payment, there are set of arguments which favors the government and there are set of arguments which counters the government. So let's look at both sides of the story. So on behalf of the government's argument, it says that the central taxes comes to around rupees 32.9 per litre of petrol and rupees 31.8 per litre of diesel. So when we spend rupees 100 on petrol or diesel, we roughly give center 32 rupees to pay these taxes. And it is in this context the government maintains that higher tax rates on petrol and diesel is necessary to pay for the oil bonds. However, there are also certain counter argument to this theory of the government. So as per this counter argument, it says that revenue earned through these higher taxes is way higher than repayment of debt obligations on these oil bonds, as center's tax revenue on petrol and diesel is estimated to be rupees 3.7 lakh crores. And this is way higher in comparison to rupees 1.3 lakh crores which is to be paid on oil bonds. So the government's argument that it needs higher taxes in order to pay for oil bonds does not hold entirely valid, as the amount collected through higher taxes is way beyond what is needed to pay for debt obligations on the principal amount and also on interest for oil bonds. So this is with respect to both sides of the story regarding government's argument as to why it want to levy higher taxes on petrol and diesel, and also the set of counter arguments which says that revenue earned through these higher taxes is way higher than the debt obligations on oil bonds. Thus, this topic becomes important both from your prelims and mains perspective. In the mains, questions can be asked on oil bonds and also the reason for high fuel prices in present times. And in the mains, questions can be asked in the GS paper 3, specifically pertaining to aspect and issues of Indian economy and also government budgeting, as oil bonds is not included while calculating SLR, and it is also not considered to be part of fiscal deficit. So with this understanding, let's take up our next article for discussion. Now the next news to be taken up also appears on page number 11 in the FAQ section. It says that will changes in Airports Economic Regulatory Authority Act will help smaller airports. Are private players going to invest in aviation if a profitable sector is clubbed with non-profitable ones? So as per this news, the Government of India has introduced amendments in the Airport Economic Regulatory Authority of India Act 2008. And this amendment is particularly regarding changing the definition of major airport. Now first of all, let us understand about the role and importance of the Airport Regulatory Authority of India. Now, as per this Act of 2008, the Airport Regulatory Authority of India regulates tariffs and other charges for the aeronautical services which is rendered at airports. So through these tariffs, the Airport Authority of India also charges certain developmental fees. So the 2021 amendment pertains to only changing the definition of major airport. So the definition of major airport highlighted that major airport means any airport which has or is designated to have annual passenger throughput in excess of 3.5 million, that is more than 35 lakh passengers, or any other airport, as the central government may by notification specify. Now, as you can see, this particular term or a group of airport. Now, this term or the phrase has been added by the 2021 amendment. So now this particular definition of major airport also includes or any other airport or group of airport. So the whole idea is that the Airport Authority of India can club certain airports for their overall development. Now the question which arises is that what sort of airports can be clubbed? So here government can club certain profitable and non-profitable airports in order to balance out the overall developmental agenda for the government, as the government aims to increase public-private partnership mode for the development of these airports. So the change of definition of major airport as per the 2021 amendment will allow the Airports Economic Regulatory Authority of India to club certain non-profitable airports for their overall development. So overall, we can say that the objective of this particular amendment is to attract investment, development of more airports through public-private partnership mode, as it will help in overall leading to a higher air traffic volume, especially for such airports whose air traffic volume is low. And the government of India through this amendment also aims to club certain airports, that is certain airports which are profitable and certain airports which are non-profitable airports, through public-private partnership mode. So regarding attraction of investment, it would be for such airports where traffic potential is low and it is loss-making airport, and such airports which are not expected to attract reasonable competitive bids. Further, developing more number of airports through public-private partnership would expand air connectivity in India, and it will allow remote and far-flung areas to be connected by air. So overall, these can be said to be the objective of the amendment of 2021. So the question remains as to how will these amendments help. So the Airport Authority of India has already awarded 6 airports, namely that of Lucknow, Ahmedabad, Jaipur, Mangaluru, Thiruvananthapuram and Guwahati, for operations, management and development in public-private partnership mode in February 2019. Now later in that year, the Airport Authority of India also approved leasing of another 6 airports at Bhubaneswar, Varanasi, Amritsar, Raipur and Tiruchirappalli, again for undertaking operations, management and development in PPP mode. So it is expected that through this amendment, the Airport Authority of India will award developmental lease to more airports, as it says that the Ministry of Civil Aviation plans to club each of these airports with nearby smaller airports for joint development. So one of the objective of clubbing these airports was to manage the profitable and non-profitable airports, and also to club each of the airports with nearby smaller airports. So any of the major airports would be connected to the smaller airports. So this is how the Airport Authority of India aims to develop smaller airports by clubbing them to a major airport. Now, even the Finance Minister of India in her budget speech has announced that the government planned to monetize airports in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. So this particular amendment is a part of such process. However, there are certain concerns which still remains. The first concern is regarding lack of clarity regarding criteria for clubbing airports together. That is, there is no criteria or definition of the government as to what kind of airports needs to be clubbed together. Are these profitable and non-profitable airports, or are these bigger airports with smaller airports? Now, so far the government has not come up with any kind of criteria. So let's wait for this criteria of clubbing these airports together. The next concern highlighted here is that the government must ensure that a monopoly situation is not created, especially while allowing private players in the development of airports. So it says that government will have to ensure that monopoly situation is not created in the airport operating business while awarding a group of airports to the same entity. For example, the entity XYZ is awarded somewhere around 15 to 20 airports to develop, and such a situation will create monopoly in the airport developmental business. Now the third criteria highlighted here is regarding the amount invested in development and also the returns with respect to these smaller airports. So it says that the growth of smaller airports will also depend on the growth prospects, economic activity, or tourist attraction for these non-profitable smaller airports. So these can be said to be some of the concerns with respect to developing these non-profitable and smaller airports in India. Now this topic becomes important both from your prelims and mains perspective. In the prelims, questions can be asked in the section of Indian polity and governance and also from the section of Indian economy. Similarly, questions can be framed in GS paper 2, especially regarding the regulatory aspect of Airport Authority of India, and also under GS paper 3 regarding Indian economy and the aspect of infrastructure, particularly airports. So with this understanding of this article, let's take up our last article for discussion. The last news to be taken up appears on page number 7 in the magazine section of the Hindu newspaper. Now this news says survival skills of the swamp deer. Inside the protected Jhilmil jheel marsh, the Barasingha, that is swamp deer, are wary of people, but their Kanha cousins behave differently. Now this news becomes important because of some important areas which has been highlighted in this article. For example, Jhilmil Jheel Conservation Reserve, about swamp deer, reasons for decline in population of swamp deer, and also about Kanha National Park. So regarding Jhilmil Jheel Conservation Reserve, this is a part of Rajaji National Park and it is also an extension of Rajaji Tiger Reserve. So Rajaji National Park and Rajaji Tiger Reserve is situated in the state of Uttarakhand in 3 districts, namely Haridwar, Dehradun and Pauri Garhwal. And if you see in this particular map of Google, here is the Jhilmil Jheel wetland and this is the Rajaji National Park. Now regarding Kanha National Park, it says that it is in the Maikal range of Satpura mountains in Madhya Pradesh. And if you see in this map, this is the Maikal range. Now regarding swamp deer has been categorized as vulnerable under IUCN and is protected under Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So both these aspects becomes important from your prelims point of view. Now regarding swamp deer or Barasingha, it is found mostly in Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Assam and Madhya Pradesh, which has been described in this newspaper as North Indian Terai region, Brahmaputra floodplains and the Central Indian grasslands. And it is also found in the Kanha Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh. Now reasons for decline in population of swamp deer includes change in river dynamics and human developmental activities, increase in siltation of these rivers, invasion by weed, reduced flow of water during critical periods of summer, and poaching of Barasingha for its meat. So these can be said to be some of the reasons for its decline. So please go through this news primarily from the perspective of your prelims examination under the section of environment. With this, let's take up our question for the day. Now after our discussion, this becomes your practice question for the day. It says, consider the following statements about UDAY scheme. First, it aimed at financial turnaround of loss-making DISCOMs. Second, it aimed at energy efficiency and conservation to reduce loss of DISCOMs. Third, UDAY scheme has been 100% successful in solving the financial problems of state DISCOMs. So the question is, which of the statements given above are correct? Options are A, 2 and 3 only, B, 1 and 2 only, C, 1 and 3 only, and D, none of the above. Now coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, consider the following statements. Under gold monetization scheme, there is no physical requirement of the gold. No, this is incorrect as there is a requirement of physical gold. Second, under the sovereign gold bond scheme, only private companies can buy the bonds. No, this is again incorrect. So the question is, which of the statements given above are incorrect? So here the correct answer becomes C, that is both 1 and 2. So with the question for the day, we come to an end to analysis for today's discussion. Thank you for watching DNS.